You're listening to the Pump Take Hockey Show with Lucas Tanner and Alex Thompson.
Welcome back to the Pump Take Sports Hockey Show. Today's beer of the week is Fax 10% Danish Stout. This beer is very popular because of the fact that it's 10% alcohol. So we'll see if we can get through this video without slipping up too much after sipping on these the whole time.
Wow.
Today we're going to be talking about the recent Tom Wilson scandal. In that he recently, if you haven't seen the clip already, got fined $5,000 by the NHL Department of Player Safety for roughing Pavel Buchnevich, an incident that also resulted in him injuring Artemi Panarin, who is now out for the rest of the season. This has been a hot topic of conversation around the NHL recently because of the popular debate around the NHL's Department of Player Safety's consistency in terms of disciplining the players and what exactly constitutes a suspension versus a monetary fine. I guess I'll open this up to discussion. What did you think when you first saw the hit?
Well, it was a dirty play, and there's no doubt about that. I mean, he had Pavel Buchnevich in a vulnerable position. He was down on the ground and didn't give him any time to react or anything. And I really thought that last punch that he gave was just completely uncalled for. Like, there was no reasoning for it. And I feel even worse for Artemi Panarin because he didn't really challenge Tom Wilson or anything. He just tried to break up the play and kind of rescue his teammate in a sense. And then Wilson body slammed him. He's like twice his size too. So I thought it was just an all-around horseshit play from Tom Wilson. I mean, we've come to expect it at this point. He's that kind of player. And I think the fine is a joke. Just no need for it. And it especially sucks to see that Panarin's missing the rest of the season. I know the Rangers aren't really in a position where they're going to make the playoffs, but it's still a big loss for them. And the fact that he had his season cut short because Wilson essentially body slammed him to the ice over a routine play was just bullshit, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Tom Wilson is one of the biggest pieces of shit in the league.
Yeah.
Maybe in professional sports as a whole. He has such a long history of doing bullshit plays like this. And things that aren't even necessary. Like, it's not like he's making a hockey play when he's doing this. This is after the whistle is blown. He decides to grab Panarin or punch Buchnevich first of all in the head, resulting in his head hitting the ice, and then grabbing Panarin by his collar and slamming him into the ground face first. So yeah, terrible play by Tom Wilson. And I think the response from the NHL Department of Player Safety was really lacking in terms of having an actual impact on Tom Wilson's play and actually disciplining him properly for what he's done.
Yeah.
$5,000 is pennies to these guys. Yeah. Tom Wilson's got a $6 million per year contract. So he's paid well. He $5,000 does nothing. All it does is tells him that he's going to be able to get away with this going forward.
It's almost a bit of an encouragement, if anything. Like, hey, buddy, if you can do whatever you want. It's open season. You'll have to fork over $5,000. I don't have the tweet on me, but someone did the math and calculated, and the fine that Tom Wilson got is the equivalent for an average full-time working Canadian, them paying $66. So that's absolutely nothing. It's like a minor speeding infraction. It is. It's like an officer caught you going, I don't know, like 100 and 190 or an 80 or an 80. Yeah, it's just, and you know what? The one question that I have that just still sticks with me to this day that I don't understand is why the fuck did the NHL think it was a good idea to employ a former goon as the head of Department of Player Safety? This guy probably caused more head injuries than anybody, and he probably took a good amount himself too. Like, I don't understand why they have him in the position where he can be making the calls like this. Yeah,
we've got former NHL enforcer George Peros running the show, determining whether or not some of his buddies are going to be getting suspensions for some of the dirty plays that he used to pull as well back when he was playing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I thought it was kind of an ironic choice when they originally hired him, but now it's turning out to be not only ironic but also very poor, because I don't think he's holding up his end of the bargain when it comes to actually disciplining these players. I think the NHL Department of Player Safety needs to streamline some regulations about what constitutes fine versus what constitutes a suspension, and I think a lot of that has to do as well with whether or not the player has a history of offending in this way, or whether they're a repeat offender. And that's often one of the reasons why you'll see some dirty plays go uncalled by the Department of Player Safety, because you see that a player, like for example, when McDavid had that high elbow earlier this season, he only got fined $5,000 as well, because he was, first of all, Connor McDavid, so the NHL doesn't want to suspend their biggest superstar, but also because he hasn't done this before. Like Connor McDavid isn't a dirty player, so I understand that. Let that one slide. But Tom Wilson has been suspended 5 times in his career by the NHL, and let me run you through Tom Wilson's history of dirty hits and suspensions in the NHL. On September 22nd, 2017, Tom Wilson was suspended 2 preseason games for a high hit on St. Louis Blues forward Robert Thomas. That was his first offense in the eyes of the Department of Player Safety. And then on August 1st, 2017, so like just a little more than a week later, he was suspended 4 regular season games for boarding also Blues forward Sammy Blais. So that's 2 suspensions at the very early beginnings of the 2017-2018 season. Those were his first offenses, let's say, in his career. Later that season in the playoffs, there was a lot of talk around Tom Wilson. I don't know if you remember his playoffs, but he had a lot of questionable hits throughout his playoffs. In the first round of the playoffs, the Washington Capitals played the Columbus Blue Jackets, and Tom Wilson barely avoided discipline after a hit on forward Alexander Wenberg. And a lot of people kind of chalk this up as there wasn't a good enough camera angle of the hit to determine whether or not it was dirty and whether or not it was intentionally hit to the head. Then in a later series in the conference finals against the Pittsburgh Penguins, Tom Wilson avoided discipline for a hit to the head on Pittsburgh defenseman Brian Dumoulin because contact with the head was unavoidable on that play. That's what the NHL said. It said that the play, in order to finish the play, he had no choice but to hit him in the head. Essentially, let him go.
I'm just going to interrupt you I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second, because the fact that the NHL can release a statement like that and still say with a straight face that they're really trying to crack down on headshots is just the most comical thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's bullshit. Like, they literally admitted that yes, there was contact to the head and it may or may not have been intentional. Unfortunately, there was no avoiding it.
I have never
why
heard
are you
that...
playing hockey, and why are you making a play in the game that results in you having to hit the guy in the head?
I have never heard that statement in my life before, and that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That he pretty much just said, all right, Wilson, so there's nothing else you can do here, so you might as well just finish your check and concuss this guy, because there's clearly no other way out. It's either concussion or bust.
So at this point of his career, now he's had 4 dirty hits that have been investigated by the NHL Department of Player Safety, and he has been thus far been suspended 4 games and 2 preseason games. Then in those same playoffs on May 1st, 2018, Tom Wilson was suspended 3 playoff games for a hit to the head on Pittsburgh's Zach Aston Reese. And then in the finals, he had another questionable hit in the Stanley Cup Finals on Jonathan Marchessault of the Vegas Golden Knights. So that's 4 instances in which Tom Wilson could have legitimately been suspended in that one playoff run where the Capitals ended up winning the Cup. And he only got suspended once for one of the hits, and it was 3 games. So he was still able to come back and make a huge impact for the Penguins, for the Capitals in the finals that season, and ultimately win the Cup with them. Then the next one is the biggest one of his career. This was at the beginning of the 2018-19 season, so this is right after they won the cup.
Yeah.
Once again in the preseason, Tom Wilson was suspended 20 games for a hit to the head on Blues forward Oscar Sundqvist. But it was reduced to 14 games after he appealed it. So that was his biggest one. I don't know if you remember that hit, but it was very, very clearly needed to be suspended. And at that point, he was a repeat offender. The NHL did a good job there, but they shouldn't have let him get off with 14 after appealing it, I think.
No, I agree.
And then for the next couple of years, he simmered a little bit in terms of dirty hits. But on March 6th, 2021, this season, he was suspended 7 games for a hit on the Boston Bruins, Brandon Carlo.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I remember that one.
Yeah. And now on May 4th, 2021, he was fined $5,000 for roughing Pavel Buchnevich. Okay. So that's Tom Wilson's lengthy history of dirty plays and suspensions, and plays that were investigated by the NHL Department of Player Safety, many of which, in my opinion, didn't get enough penalty associated with them. There was a few that he got off scot-free from, and I think that's a mistake from the NHL, because what's resulted in is that the NHL has sort of enabled Tom Wilson to play the style of game that he does, and sort of strike fear into other players in a way that, hockey is a physical game. But when Tom Wilson has a history of very evidently not only hitting people in the head, but also targeting their heads, you have to really crack down on this. And a fine of $5,000 after all of that history that I just went through is just not even remotely enough.
It's pathetic. And you know what? Here's what I have to say about all that. So you just went through the entire list of all of the instances where Tom Wilson either got suspended or should have gotten suspended for a dirty play. And what I've taken away from that is evidently Tom Wilson does not give a fuck what happens to him. He's going to keep playing that style of game, because you would have thought that after that Oscar Sundqvist incident, you would have thought that after getting suspended for 14 games, he would have cleaned it up. But if he's still playing like this now, he clearly doesn't give a shit. And I saw a lot of people on Twitter saying that Tom Wilson, and this is including myself as well, that Tom Wilson should have been suspended for the rest of the season and the playoffs for what he did yesterday with Pavel Buchnevich and Artemi Panarin. I agree with that 100%. Having said that, I think a lot of people were also saying that even if you were to suspend Tom Wilson for the rest of the season in the playoffs, he is not going to do anything about it. He doesn't care, because he's Tom Wilson and that's the style of game he's played. So I think we've established at this point that there's no fixing Tom Wilson, because he clearly doesn't care. He will do whatever it takes. He'll commit a dirty play. He doesn't give a fuck. You can give him any suspension, any fine, and he'll keep playing the way he is. Doesn't matter. So the way that I think this needs to be looked at is the NHL needs to look at this as a punishment more for the Capitals than a punishment for Tom Wilson. Because I don't know, did you see that tweet that the Capitals put up yesterday after Tom Wilson did that?
That was puking.
So Tom Wilson, for those that didn't see it, the Capitals more or less glorified the incident, and they pretty much just made fun of people who were upset with Tom Wilson and said they were living rent-free, that he was living rent-free in their heads. They posted a stupid meme about it. They deleted the tweet. They got backlash. So clearly the Capitals are okay with this. And even when their coach got into the scrum afterwards, and when coach was talking to reporters, he just brushed it off and said, "Oh, well, he was just in a scrum. It's not that big a deal." So I think the league needs to stop looking at these suspensions as punishments for Tom Wilson and start addressing them as punishments for the Capitals, because we're at a point now where Tom Wilson's become a legitimate contributor for the Capitals, and he can score goals, and he's playing a role where if the Capitals lose him, they're actually losing a big part of their team. It's not just like, it's not like 2017 where it's like, okay, we're losing our fourth line goon for a couple years.
He's a solid games. Top six winger for them.
He is. He's an important part of their team at this point. So I think, sure, if the Department of Player Safety gives him a fine, maybe he won't give a shit about it. Maybe the Caps won't give a shit about it. But if you give him a fine, a serious one, 15 games, something like that, maybe that'll tell the Capitals, listen, we're taking away one of your best players for the next 15 games. You need to stop fucking enabling this, and sit him down and tell him, Tom, you got to stop playing like this. And I think that's the only possible way that we're going to see any change in this, because, we talk about how the NHL is trying to crack down on headshots and how the NHL is trying to crack down on dirty plays. But if they keep allowing this and keep essentially charging him a nickel for what he's doing, he's not going to stop. This is never, ever going to stop. And I think the only way that you can really address this and get it to stop is by punishing the team that enables it. Because if you look at it like a punishment for Tom Wilson, like I said, he got suspended for 14 games and he's still pulling shit like this. So he obviously doesn't care about the suspensions or the fines. He is going to keep playing the game that he knows and that the team apparently likes him to play. But if you push it to a point where the Capitals are suffering from this, and the Capitals are the ones that are having to kind of take the heat because they're losing one of their better players, I think at that point you might actually see some progress. But the longer that they keep acting like it's just a suspension for Tom Wilson, the longer this is going to keep happening. And there's no other way around it, in my opinion.
Exactly. Because like the thing is like they look at it like from a pros and cons of the way that Tom Wilson plays, right? They think, okay, the benefit we get from the style of play that Tom Wilson has, and also the fear that he probably strikes into opposing players, is also probably very significant, whether or not he's actually like doing anything, or he's just, his presence is just this assaulter, in a sense, on the ice. That's very beneficial for the Capitals to have, right? So the way they view this is they're every once in a while, Tom might get suspended and Tom might get fined, but that's a risk we're willing to take, because in the long run, on a game-to-game basis, when Tom is in the lineup, we're benefiting from this very significantly. So yeah, there needs to be much more crackdown on this type of play, because the Capitals are clearly, they want him to play this way, right? They've enabled him to do so, and the NHL has continued to enable him to do so as well. And it's bad for the league, because like the NHL is trying to, they keep doing all these press releases about how they're kind of trying to crack down on CTE and headshots and concussions and all this stuff, brain damage. But when you've got a player that's playing this way and you're not like actually stopping him to do so, it's less about like the structure of the helmet, and it's more about the play on the ice.
Exactly.
Right? So they're focusing on the wrong pieces of the sport that they need to fix.
Exactly.
When they're trying to address this issue.
And just going back to the point that I was making before, could you imagine how fucked the Capitals would be if they were told that they wouldn't have Tom Wilson for the rest of the season and the entirety of the playoffs? Yeah. I bet you if that was the case, if the Capitals actually if the NHL actually did give the Capitals or give Tom Wilson that suspension, I don't think the Caps would be laughing and posting memes about Tom Wilson and how he lives rent-free in the heads of other NHL fans. No. I think they'd be pretty upset that they're losing one of their better players for the most important part of the season. And I think at that point they'd say, okay, listen, Tom, you got to simmer with the headshots. Like, stop. Yeah. And I don't understand why people are acting like this is like out of order to give him something like that, because this is what, his 14th offense or something like that, between fines and suspensions. Like, I think this is the 14th time he's gotten into hot water with the league. So at this point, it's like, how else are you going to get him to stop doing that? You can't. Like, you got to give him a serious suspension. I think back to the suspension that Rafi Torres got. I forget who he laid the hit on, but I remember he got suspended for something like half a season. Yeah, it was obviously towards the tail end of his career. So it wasn't
like 40 games that he got.
It was something like that, yeah. So I don't know about 40 games, but for Tom Wilson at the very least, and at this point in the season, I guarantee you, had the NHL dished him a suspension of the rest of the season and the entirety of the playoffs, we'd be seeing less of this in the coming years. But the fact that they shelled out, they told him to shell out $5,000. Like I said, $66 for the average hardworking Canadian. It's like, he's not going to stop doing this. He's probably going to be at 25 offenses by the end of his career. Like,
another thing I wanted to point out too is that the fact that the maximum allowable fine under the current collective bargaining agreement is $5,000 is a joke. That's the maximum. They can't fine a player any more than $5,000. Like, come on, figure it out.
I'd honestly
you gotta ramp that up a little bit. Like 5,000. Like if guys are getting suspended for less than $5,000, like that's a joke. You gotta be finding these guys on a bit more of a on a basis
hit them where
it's gonna hurt a little more. You know, like
yeah. You know what I would do? I would adjust the fine. I wouldn't have a set in stone fine, maximum allowable fine. I would probably adjust it. I would adjust. Yeah, exactly. I'd adjust it based on what guys are making. So for a guy like Tom Wilson, say, and maybe this is, I only use him as an example because he's making what, $6 million a year. So maybe a little more for him since this would be his next offense. And I say his next because I know there will be another offense. I would up the fine to 500,000. I wouldn't stop at 5,000. I'd say 500,000 because it's not going to burden him financially, but it'll be enough to say, okay, like I can't keep doing this, or I'm not going to have any money left. Like,
yeah, exactly.
It's just, I'm just so fucking sick of the NHL pretending like they care about shit like this and just sort of making these moves, like you said, with the helmets and how they're changing the way helmets are. And it's like, oh, all of a sudden CTE is just going to disappear now because they adjusted the way that helmets are made. It's like, no, you like the NHL is just more or less in the end just trying to make moves to make it appear like they're doing something, but really they're not cracking down on the important areas enough.
Yeah, like, it's all about how the public views it. So they're like, oh, the NHL is doing all this stuff to cut down on concussions, and they've got the concussion protocol now and all that bullshit. It's like, okay, I get it. Concussion protocol is a good thing. Take a guy off the ice if he got cranked in the head, but he already got cranked in the head, so he already has the concussion. Like you're not stopping him from getting more of a concussion by like take him off. Like that should go without saying. If a guy gets hit in the head, you take him off. You take him out.
You know what the equivalent of that is? That would be the equivalent of having a shop vac outside of a house that has a flooded basement. It's like, okay, so we're not going to do anything to cover up the leak that caused this flood, but we're going to have a shop vac ready to clean it up for afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
See, we're doing something. Like, no, it's bullshit.
Like, look, we've got a shop vac ready to go. Like, come on. Like, you gotta, like, they've got to actually, like, they're doing things to look good and to look pretty, in the media, but
public eye.
Really, it's like, they're not doing it. Like this is a great example of this. Like, I know that nobody got too badly hurt in this situation. But like, look at the clip of Tom Wilson. Maybe we'll put the clip over top of this video at some point when we edit it later. But watch the clip and watch how he grabs. First of all, he repeatedly punches Pavel Buchnevich in the head while he's lying in the crease, and his head slams into the ice. And then afterwards, after Panarin tries to come and grab him off of Buchnevich, he turns to Panarin while Panarin's on the ground, grabs him by the collar, picks him up, and slams him into the ice. Like, that's animalistic, primitive behavior. It's
assault. You can just call it assault. That's what
it's assault. You cannot be doing that in the NHL, in professional sports.
And one final thing that I want to plug here, John Scott, AKA one of the NHL's most notorious, just classic goons, a guy whose purpose was literally only to go out there and punch people's faces in, a guy that was sent after Phil Kessel in a 2015, of all guys, Phil Kessel in a 2015 preseason game. John Scott thought it was bullshit. John Scott had no words for how fucking bullshit it was that the maximum fine that Tom Wilson got for what he did to Pavel Buchnevich and Artemi Panarin was $5,000. If John Scott, the notorious goon, says it's bullshit, then it's bullshit. Like, there's no other way to avoid this. Like,
yeah. The last thing I want to say is, I know we mentioned this before, but I want to emphasize this as well. NHL, Gary Bettman, if you're listening, do not let a former enforcer be the one running the show of your NHL Department of Player Safety. That's a terrible look for the league. George Peros, I'm sure he's a fine guy. I'm sure he tries to be unbiased in this job, but it's just a bad look for the league. If you're trying to make it look like you are trying to cut down on these physical plays that are resulting in people getting hurt and getting brain injuries, then don't have one of your most notorious goons be the one that's doling out punishments to the players that are currently playing and currently assaulting other players in the league, especially if they're not going to do a good job about it. If George Peros was doing a great job, hands down, I would be okay with it. But it looks so bad when you have a former goon, George Peros, running the show, and he's doing stuff like this, like fining Tom Wilson $5,000 for essentially assaulting two players on the ice. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. You know what? The NHL employing George Peros as the director of player safety is pretty much the equivalence of a police force naming a guy like Pablo Escobar the chief of police. Yeah. That's pretty much the equivalent. Like you're completely contradicting everything. You're trying to cut down on head injuries, and you're trying to crack down on plays that result in life-changing injuries and stuff. Why don't you name a guy like Paul Correa or Eric Lindros as the Department of Player Safety head? Yeah, because they know how fucking badly your life can be altered.
Yeah,
with something
like
that.
They have like personal connection to these types of head injuries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like not the guy. Don't name the guy that was doling him out for fucking 10 years in his career.
To be fair, George Peros, I'm sure, has probably taken a fair share of concussions himself. Probably contributes to why he thought it was acceptable to give Tom Wilson a $5,000 fine for.
Yeah, but to his own fault. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. I'm sure he didn't really have much room to avoid it, but yeah, it's horseshit. It's absolute horseshit.
Anyways, all right. So let's. What did you think of the beer? Like, we'll review the facts. 10%.
You know what?
Quality extra strong beer.
That was easier drinking than I expected it to be. I actually legitimately enjoyed that beer. I'm gonna give that an 8 out of 10.
An 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10.
It gets you a little buzzy though, eh? It's like
it does, yeah. And you know what? I'll give it a part of the reason I give it an 8 out of 10 too is the fact that I'm typically not a big stout guy. Like if you've watched Pump Takes videos ever since we started doing this beer of the week thing, you know that I'm almost exclusively a lager guy. I have room for a Pilsner every now and then. Typically don't drink IPAs or stouts, but that was good. That was a good beer. I enjoyed that. So I'll give it an 8 out of 10. I'm pretty satisfied with it.
Yeah. And I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Similar reasons for you. Like, I think it's a very easy drinking, strong beer. That'll get you there quicker than most beers will. It's also one of my favorite brands of beer. Fax Lager is probably my favorite lager beer that I buy all the time. It's a good price and everything, but this is definitely a more interesting one that not a lot of people know about necessarily. But the ones that do know it to be one of the easier drinking beers. It's also very high in alcohol percentage. So yeah, I give it a 7 out of 10. I strongly recommend to anyone that likes a darker beer. And it's also it comes at a decent price. So give it a try.
Good beer. Good beer.
Anyway, all right. So I guess we'll wrap up our video here. Thanks for tuning in, and let us know in the comments what you think of the Tom Wilson suspension. Whether or not you think that he should have been suspended, or whether or not you think that the fine of $5,000 was sufficient for the offense that he pulled against Pavel Buchnevich. And tune in next week for more Pump Take hockey content. Thanks for watching.